The message arrived on a rainy Tuesday in Tokyo, materializing as a shimmering hologram in the middle of Kira Tanaka's modest dojo. She had been practicing with her grandfather's katana when the air split open, revealing three beings that seemed to be made of living crystal. Their translucent bodies pulsed with internal light, and their voices resonated like wind chimes in a storm. Kira Tanaka of Earth, the tallest one spoke, its form shifting through various shades of blue. You have been chosen to represent your species in the galactic trials. Kira lowered her sword, sweat still dripping from her previous exercise. At 26, she was the youngest master of her family's ancient sword style, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this moment. Why me? The crystalline beings, who called themselves the Luminari, exchanged what might have been glances. Your species stands at a crossroads, the second one said, its voice deeper, more melodious. The Galactic Council debates whether humanity deserves a place among the stars. Some say you are too primitive, too violent, too unpredictable. Kira's grip tightened on her sword's handle. And you think watching me fight will help make this decision? The trials are more than combat, the third Luminari spoke, its form rippling with patterns of gold and silver. They are a test of wisdom, courage, and evolution itself. Many species have faced this challenge. Few have succeeded. The hologram shifted, showing images of a vast arena floating in space. Beings of various forms and sizes fought against creatures that defied description. Some wielded weapons that seemed to bend reality itself, while others commanded forces that made Kira's sword look like a child's toy. You may choose any weapon from Earth's history, the first Luminari explained. No modern technology, no powered assists, nothing beyond what your ancestors might have used. Kira looked at her grandfather's sword, its steel catching the afternoon light. And if I refuse? Then another will be chosen, but know this, the council grows impatient. Some believe humanity should be contained. For the galaxy's safety. The implications hung heavy in the air. Kira thought of her grandfather's stories, of warriors who stood against impossible odds not for glory, but because no one else would. When do we begin? The Luminari's light pulsed brighter. Now. The dojo dissolved around her, replaced by a vast chamber with walls that seemed to be made of living metal. Hundreds of alien beings filled observation platforms that floated at various heights. Many looked humanoid, but others were so bizarre that Kira's mind struggled to process their forms. A voice boomed through the chamber, speaking in a language she didn't understand, yet somehow comprehended. Behold, the human champion arrives with nothing but primitive steel and animal hide. Laughter rippled through the crowd, a cacophony of sounds that made her skin crawl. A tall, serpentine being with scales like polished obsidian slithered forward. I am High Judge Vixis of the Galactic Council. Are you prepared to defend your species' right to join galactic society? Kira stood straighter, feeling the weight of her ancestors' teachings in every breath. I am prepared to show you who we really are. More laughter. And what can you show us with that crude piece of metal? Our youngest children command energies that could reduce your weapon to atoms. Perhaps, Kira said, sliding into a ready stance, that's why you fear us. We achieved so much with so little. The chamber fell silent. Vixis's eyes narrowed to slits. Very well, human. Your first trial begins in one planetary rotation. I suggest you pray to whatever primitive deities you worship. As the aliens dispersed, still chuckling among themselves, Kira was led to a small chamber that would serve as her quarters. The walls shimmered with soft light, and a window looked out onto a star field she didn't recognize. Alone, she unsheathed her grandfather's sword and began her daily kata. The blade moved through the air with practiced precision, each movement a meditation, each breath a reminder of why she fought. The aliens might have their energy weapons and reality-bending technology, but they had forgotten something crucial. Sometimes the oldest paths held the deepest wisdom. As she trained, she caught glimpses of alien observers watching through hidden panels, their amusement evident in their postures. Let them laugh, she thought. Tomorrow, they would learn why humans never needed translation devices to understand the language of steel and courage. In the distance, something roared, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the station. Kira didn't flinch. Whatever waited for her in the arena, she would face it as her ancestors had faced their trials, with honor, skill, and the quiet certainty that victory often went not to the strongest, but to the most determined. The sword continued its dance, cutting through air that smelled of metal and stars, while humanity's fate balanced on its edge. The training chamber they provided Kira was vast and empty, its walls shifting like mercury. Alien technology could create any environment, any opponent, yet they seemed puzzled when she asked for nothing more than a simple wooden post. Your first trial approaches, and you waste time hitting wood. The voice belonged to Zara K, a being composed of what appeared to be living plasma contained within an exoskeleton of iridescent metal. She had introduced herself as Kira's observer, though amused babysitter seemed more accurate. Kira continued her strikes, each hit precise and measured. Tell me, Zara K, have you ever wondered why humans still practice with wooden swords when we have nuclear weapons? The alien's plasma form rippled with what might have been confusion. Because you are primitive? Nostalgic for simpler times? Because fundamentals matter. Kira stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow. Every advanced technique builds on basic movements. Forget the basics, and your foundation crumbles. Charming philosophy, Zara K's tone dripped with condescension. But your first opponent uses crystalline blades that can cut through battleship armor. Perhaps you'd like to reconsider your approach? We do allow energy weapons of certain eras. Kira sheathed her sword and walked to the chamber's window. Outside, the massive arena hung in space like a jeweled spider web, its crystalline strands gleaming in the light of 3 distant suns. Tell me about my opponent. Vexthor of the Crystal Dominion. 300 victories in ritual combat. He's ended the aspirations of 12 different species seeking council membership. Zara K moved closer, her form casting shifting shadows. The betting pools give you less than 2 minutes of survival. Betting pools? Kira raised an eyebrow. Good to know some things are universal. You're not taking this seriously enough. Vexthor doesn't just defeat his opponents, he humiliates them. Makes examples of them. The Crystal Dominion believes that lesser species should know their place. Kira began another kata, her movements slow and deliberate. You know what I find interesting? In all of Earth's history, every empire that believed in lesser species eventually fell. Usually to those same lesser species. Your confidence is admirable, if misplaced. Zara K gestured, and a hologram appeared showing Vexthor in combat. His crystalline body moved with liquid grace, blades extending and retracting from his form at will. Watch how he fights. Perhaps you'll reconsider your primitive approach. Kira watched, her eyes narrowing. Yes, Vexthor was impressive, his movements were perfect, his technique flawless. And therein lay his weakness. Thank you, she said finally. This has been very educational. You found a weakness in his perfect technique? Zara K's tone was mockingly sweet. No. Kira drew her sword, examining its edge in the starlight. I found proof that he's never faced a real challenge. His movements are textbook perfect because he's never had to adapt. Never had to improvise. Never had to bleed for victory. The alien's plasma form pulsed with what might have been concern. And you have? Instead of answering, Kira gestured to her left arm, where a long scar ran from elbow to wrist. When I was 12, I tried a technique before I was ready. The sword slipped. My grandfather could have stopped the bleeding immediately with modern medicine, but he made me wrap it traditionally first. Said some lessons need to be written in flesh to be remembered. Barbaric, Zara K whispered. Necessary, Kira corrected. Every scar is a lesson. Every failure a step toward mastery. Your perfect warrior has never failed, never bled, never doubted. That makes him vulnerable. The chamber's lights dimmed, indicating night cycle was beginning. In 12 hours, Kira would face Vexthor in combat that would help determine humanity's fate. As Zarake turned to leave, Kira called after her. One more thing, she said, rolling her shoulders. Double your bet on me lasting past 2 minutes. Trust me, it'll be worth it. That night, as most of the station slept, Kira continued her practice. Her movements were no longer just kata, they were a conversation with the universe, a prayer, a promise. Each swing of her sword cut through more than air, it cut through doubt, through fear, through the weight of expectations. In the darkness of space, watched by stars older than human civilization, a single warrior prepared to prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their weapons or technology, but in their ability to rise from every fall, learn from every failure, and face each dawn with renewed determination. Tomorrow would write a new chapter in human history, one way or another. And Kira intended to make sure it was written in starlight, not blood. The arena materialized around Kira like a dream taking solid form. The floor beneath her feet was some sort of living crystal that shifted colors with each step. Above, thousands of alien spectators filled the floating platforms, their varied forms creating a tapestry of movement and light. In the sixth age of the luminous accord, a voice boomed in all languages at once, we witnessed the trial of humanity's champion. The announcement was met with a mixture of cheers and derisive sounds from the crowd. Across the arena, Vexthor emerged. His crystalline body caught the light of 1,000 stars, refracting it into patterns that danced across the arena floor. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his form constantly shifting between solid and liquid states. A sword? His voice resonated like breaking glass. They sent their champion with a sword? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Kira rolled her shoulders, settling into a ready stance. You talk too much. The arena's barriers hummed to life, fields of energy that would protect the spectators from what was about to unfold. High Judge Vixis's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd, begin. Vexthor moved like liquid lightning. Crystal blades erupted from his form, a dozen razor-sharp appendages seeking Kira's flesh. But where he expected to find her, there was only empty air. Kira had already moved, her footwork carrying her just beyond his reach. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind, the sword is not the weapon. You are the weapon. The sword is just a tool. Stand still, primitive. Vexthor's form expanded, crystal shards flying through the air like deadly rain. Kira danced through the barrage, her sword moving in precise arcs. The ring of steel on crystal sang through the arena. Each time a shard came too close, her blade was there, deflecting, redirecting. Impossible, someone in the crowd whispered. She's anticipating his attacks. She wasn't just anticipating, she was reading him like a book. Every perfect attack, every flawless movement told her exactly what he would do next. His technique was immaculate, unchanged by centuries of victory. And that made him predictable. You can't defend forever. Vexthor's frustration manifested in increasingly aggressive attacks. His crystal form swirled and stretched, trying to engulf her. Who's defending? Kira moved inside his reach, her blade striking his core with precision. A sound like breaking glass filled the arena, and a small crack appeared in Vexthor's perfect form. The crowd gasped. Zarake, watching from her observation pod, leaned forward in disbelief. Vexthor recoiled, his form rippling with shock and rage. How did you? You protect your core on the 17th strike, Kira said, already moving. Every time. A pattern you probably don't even realize you have. Her blade flashed again, opening another crack. The crystalline warrior roared, his form exploding outward in deadly spikes. But Kira was already gone, flowing around his attacks like water around stones. Each movement was efficient, purposeful, taught by generations of warriors who had learned that survival often meant making every action count. Stand and fight. Vexthor's voice shook the arena. I am fighting, Kira replied calmly. You're just not used to an opponent who doesn't fight the way you expect. She struck again, her blade finding another weakness. The crack in Vexthor's core spread like a spider's web. His movements became less fluid, more desperate. The crowd had fallen silent, watching in rapt attention as their expectations crumbled like Vexthor's perfect defense. This wasn't the quick, humiliating defeat they had expected. This was something else, a lesson written in determination and skill. Enough. Vexthor gathered himself for one final attack, his entire form condensing into a single, perfect spear of crystal. Time seemed to slow. Kira saw the attack coming, direct, powerful, unstoppable. Perfect in every way. And perfectly wrong. She stepped forward, not away. Her sword moved in an arc that her ancestors had perfected over centuries, a movement designed to turn an opponent's strength against them. As Vexthor's perfect attack met her blade, physics and skill combined. The crack in his core split wide open. Vexthor's form shattered, chunks of crystal raining down across the arena floor. His consciousness, a shimmering mist, remained intact, defeated but alive. Silence hung in the air for one eternal moment. Then the arena erupted in chaos. Some spectators cheered, others protested, and many simply stared in shock. High Judge Vixis's voice cut through the tumult. The first trial is concluded. The human champion is victorious. Kira sheathed her sword and bowed to her fallen opponent. As she straightened, she caught Zarak's eye in the observation pod. The plasma being's form was pulsing with what might have been respect. But there was no time to celebrate. This was only the first trial, and something told Kira that her next opponents wouldn't underestimate the power of a human with a sword. As she left the arena, whispers followed her. The betting pools were already adjusting their odds, and somewhere in the station's depths, her next challenge was waiting. But for now, humanity had shown that they belonged among the stars, not because of their technology, but because of something far more important, their ability to learn, adapt, and overcome. The news of Vexthor's defeat spread through the station like a shockwave. Kira spent the night in meditation, knowing that her next trial would be far more dangerous. They wouldn't underestimate her again. Dawn's cycle found her in the observation deck, watching as station workers reconstructed the arena. Zarak materialized beside her, the plasma being's form unusually subdued. The council is disturbed by yesterday's outcome, Zarak said quietly. They're changing your next trial. Of course they are. Kira didn't take her eyes off the arena. They can't risk another warrior losing to a primitive. They're bringing in the nemesis. Now Kira turned, noting the fear in Zarak's fluctuating form. Tell me. The nemesis was, an attempt to create the perfect predator. A biological weapon from the last Great War. It learns, adapts, evolves during combat. The longer you fight it, the stronger it becomes. Zarak's form dimmed. No one has ever survived more than 10 minutes against it. Kira absently touched her sword's hilt. Why keep such a creature alive? The council believes it represents the peak of evolution. A reminder of what lesser species might become. Zarak moved closer. Kira, you don't understand. This isn't about testing humanity anymore. They want to make an example of you. The arena below had transformed. Its crystalline floor was now covered in what looked like living metal, surfaces that could shift and change at will. Perfect terrain for an adaptive predator. How many? Kira asked. What? How many champions has the nemesis killed? Zarak's form flickered. 17. All of them armed with weapons far more advanced than your sword. Kira nodded slowly. Then it's time someone gave it a real fight. The arena was packed beyond capacity when Kira entered. The atmosphere was different now, no mockery, no laughter. The aliens watched in tense silence as she took her position. High Judge Vixis's voice held none of its previous condescension. "Champion of Earth, you may still withdraw. The Council will accept humanity's submission without further demonstration." Kira drew her sword, its steel catching the starlight. "We both know that's not going to happen." A low rumble shook the arena. The floor split open, and something emerged from the depths. The nemesis rose like a nightmare-given form, a mass of shifting black tissue and gleaming bone. Its body seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and multiple eyes of various sizes studied her with predatory intelligence. "Your species' pride will be your downfall," Vixis said softly. "No," Kira replied, settling into her stance. "It will be our salvation." The nemesis moved. It was faster than anything its size had any right to be, covering half the arena in a heartbeat. Kira rolled, feeling the air displacement as massive claws swept through where she had stood. The creature was already adapting, its form shifting, becoming more streamlined. New limbs sprouted and were absorbed as it tested different configurations. Kira struck, her blade finding what looked like a joint. The sword bit deep, drawing ichor, but the wound sealed almost instantly, the flesh learning from the injury, becoming denser. "Do you see?" Vixis called out. "It evolves beyond your ability to harm it. Every attack makes it stronger." But Kira had seen something in that first exchange. The way the creature moved, the intelligence in its eyes, this wasn't just a weapon. It was alive. And everything alive had instincts. She began to move differently, her steps following patterns laid down by ancient masters. The nemesis tracked her, its form constantly shifting, but something in its movements had changed. It was studying her just as she studied it. "What are you doing?" Zarake whispered from her observation pod. Kira didn't respond. She was too focused on the dance, for that's what this was. A dance older than civilization, older than weapons. The dance of predator and prey, of hunter and hunted. The nemesis launched another attack, its form now a perfect killing machine honed by combat. But instead of dodging, Kira stepped into its charge. Her blade moved in the most basic of cuts, the first move every student learned. The creature's adaptive flesh couldn't react fast enough to a movement it hadn't recognized as a threat. Steel parted flesh, and this time, the wound didn't heal instantly. The arena went silent. The nemesis recoiled, actually recoiled, as if shocked by the concept of pain. Its form rippled, trying to adapt, to evolve past this new experience. "Impossible," someone in the crowd whispered. "It's hesitating." Kira pressed her advantage, but not with complex techniques or killing strikes. She used the most basic moves, the ones every warrior learned first. Cuts so simple they were practically prehistoric. And the nemesis, for all its adaptive brilliance, couldn't evolve past them. It had been designed to counter complexity, to learn and surpass advanced techniques. But these moves, these simple, perfect cuts, they were fundamental. Like trying to evolve past the need to breathe. The creature's confidence was shaken. For the first time in its existence, evolution wasn't providing an answer. Its attacks became erratic, desperate. Kira moved like water, each strike finding its mark. She wasn't fighting against evolution, she was reaching past it, touching something deeper. The basic truths that all life knew: survival, fear, pain. The nemesis bellowed, a sound that shook the arena's foundations. It gathered itself for one final attack, its form becoming something that defied description. Kira waited, sword ready, breathing steady. The creature charged. She moved once, a single perfect cut. The nemesis collapsed, its form dissolving into base components. Not dead, but fundamentally transformed. The perfect predator had been defeated not by superior evolution, but by remembering what it was to be prey. The arena erupted in chaos. Vixis was shouting something about impossible outcomes and protocol violations. But Kira simply cleaned her blade and sheathed it, her movements as precise as they had been in practice. She had shown them something they had forgotten, that sometimes the oldest truths were the most powerful. And humanity's next trial would find them ready. The station was in an uproar. 2 trials, 2 victories, and humanity's champion had shattered more than just opponents, she had broken fundamental assumptions about power and progress. Kira stood before the full council, her sword still sheathed at her side, waiting as they argued among themselves. The council chamber was a vast sphere suspended in space, its walls transparent, showing the endless dance of stars beyond. The council members, representatives of the galaxy's most advanced species, sat in ascending rings of light, their forms ranging from energy beings to crystalline entities to things that defied human comprehension. High Judge Vixis's voice cut through the chaos. Silence. The chamber stilled. We face an unprecedented situation. The human has survived trials designed to be insurmountable. The question before us is why. A figure emerged from the highest tier of the chamber, a being of pure light that seemed to bend reality around it. The Ancient One, as others called it, had not spoken in 1,000 years. We have forgotten, its voice resonated directly in their minds. We have forgotten what we were looking for. The chamber erupted in confused whispers. Kira stood perfectly still, feeling the weight of ages pressing down around her. The trials were never about technological advancement, the Ancient One continued. They were about potential. About finding those who could remind us of what we once were. Images filled the chamber, histories older than human civilization. The Ancient One's people, the first ones, seeding the galaxy with life, watching, waiting for something to emerge. We became so focused on advancement that we forgot advancement's purpose, the being of light said. We forgot that true evolution isn't about becoming more complex, it's about becoming more perfect in your fundamental nature. Kira found her voice. That's why the sword worked. Why the simple moves defeated your perfect predator. Yes. The Ancient One descended, its light filling the chamber. You showed us what we had forgotten. That strength lies not in abandoning our foundations, but in perfecting them. In remembering what we are, even as we become something more. The images shifted, showing Earth's history, not just its technological advancement, but its art, its philosophy, its endless drive to improve while remembering its roots. Humanity, the Ancient One declared, has not just passed the trials. They have shown us why we created the trials in the first place. High Judge Vixis stirred. What are you saying? I am saying that we have found what we were looking for. A species that advances without losing itself. That grows without forgetting. That can remind us of what we once were. The Ancient One's light touched Kira gently. And perhaps show us what we might become again. The chamber filled with a new kind of silence, not the silence of shock or disbelief, but the silence of revelation. Of understanding dawning like a new sun. The Council recognizes humanity, Vixis announced, his voice carrying the weight of law. Not as subordinates, but as teachers. Kira bowed, a warrior's bow, respectful but unbowed. We have much to learn from each other. Indeed. The Ancient One's light began to fade. Tell your people, Kira Tanaka, that the stars await them. Not as conquerors or supplicants, but as reminders of what is possible when we remember who we are. As Kira prepared to return to Earth, Zarake approached her one last time. The plasma being's form rippled with something like admiration. I still don't fully understand, Zarake admitted. How did such a primitive weapon defeat our most advanced creations? Kira smiled, touching her grandfather's sword. Because it was never about the weapon. It was about remembering that the simplest truths are often the most powerful. That sometimes, to move forward, you have to remember where you came from. She looked out at the endless field of stars, each one now a potential home, a potential lesson, a potential future. Besides, she added softly, any species that thinks a sword is primitive has forgotten what it means to forge something that lasts. The stars beckoned, and humanity answered, carrying with them not just their technology in their weapons, but their stories, their arts, their memories of what it meant to grow without forgetting, to advance without losing their soul. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, other species watched and remembered what it meant to be more than just advanced, to be alive. The true evolution had begun.